All right. Let me know if my sound is good. Okay. Well, so Gabe, Josh, welcome. Doctrinal intersectionality in hell. Is there a difference? Maybe not. We'll see. We'll see. So what made me start thinking about this? Sorry, I've been running around doing a bunch of other stuff. What up, Lance? So I have not been just like focused in on this and having clear thoughts. So this is all clear in my mind. I was actually in one of the Signal chats. I would just play back this stupid message that I had to, which Lance, I don't know if you're even in there anymore. I think you should be. This is an old group. But I was interacting with Yosef and Dave Williams and Jason, and we were talking about hell. Well, okay, here's the connection. It was tied to that Zizek video. So PVK, I should just play that. PVK was talking about it in his conversation this morning, and he brought it up because it was related to his talk that he had, his Friday live stream with all the CRC people, and they were talking about LGBTQ issues and blah blah blah, whatever. So like I just need to play it because it's pertinent to the thing. Where is just my profile? Okay, listen, I don't need to Twitter. I don't need to I don't know how to operate Twitter. I don't need what everyone else is saying because who cares? We just need to know what I'm saying. All right, let's play this.
Imagine you are a small girl or boy of, let's say, 8 years. It's Sunday afternoon, and your father wants you to visit your old grandmother. Then, if you have an old authoritarian father, he will tell you, listen, I don't care how you feel. Just do your duty. Go to your grandmother and behave there properly. That's perfect, I claim. Because you will retain your, let's call it inner freedom. You will be furious at your father. But that's good for your long-term freedom and so on. Now, what would a monster called postmodern permissive father?
Okay, I was interacting with a bunch of people back and forth about the postmodern part of it. I mean, I don't know. Zizek is way smarter than me, and he's an academic, published philosopher with credentialing and training, and he's, I think, pretty well respected even across different ideological camps. And so he does use the word postmodern, but I had some conversations with some local friends and other people that postmodern isn't maybe the best term. That's a side tangent. So like if postmodern bothers you, just ignore that word. Okay. So like old school father, just go to your grandma's house, just do it. I don't care about your feelings. Which doesn't necessarily mean he doesn't care about your feelings. It means your feelings aren't the primary metric by which we're going to decide if we want to go. It's kind of like to a little kid. It's like, apologize. You need to apologize. Well, I don't feel like apologizing. Doesn't matter. Apologize. Okay. Now we're going on to a new kind of father because it allows for, I'll rewind it some. I wanted to add that caveat of postmodernism. Okay, let's go back a little bit.
Mother and behave there properly. That's perfect, I claim. Because you will retain your, let's call it inner freedom. You will be furious at your father. But that's good for your long-term freedom and so on. Now, what would a monster called postmodern permissive father do? He would not give you an order, but he would have told you something like this. You only go to visit your grandmother if you really want it. Just remember how much your grandmother loves you. Now, a child is not an idiot, and he or she will know perfectly what this order means. Beneath the appearance of a free choice, it gives you a much harsher order. The order is not only you must go and visit your grandmother, but you must do it freely. You must really wish to visit your grandmother.
Okay, now that's important, and I agree with Zizek here. He's saying you must do it freely. I think his characterization there of true freedom is right. You need to do it freely, but you have to want to. So, freedom, true freedom, entails desire. Okay, this is going to get at my big idea, my mosaic, and I'll try to lay it out after we finish this clip.
So you see this nice example of how, where the apparent freedom of choice masks a much harsher choice.
Okay, so the freedom, the wanting to, the requiring, the wanting to requires a much harsher totalitarianism, but yet is masked because it's implicit. It's not explicit. It's like, well, I mean, it is explicit in that you want to, but the hidden hard pill, what's the word? The what's that phrase, that idiom? The hard pill to swallow, is that just it? Is that it's a colonizing of your desire. You have to want this. Now, what's the difference between that you ought to want this, you should want this, and you have to? Those are different things. So it's an interesting. My friend Rod, who just messaged, my friend Rod said essentially what this is, and I think this is right. And I don't know why. I didn't map this right away, but or connect it. But it's essentially the difference between what PVK has said in the corner, Paul Vanderklay. For those who don't know, who in here doesn't know who Paul Vanderklay is? That'd be interesting. But it's essentially the difference between sincerity culture and authenticity culture. And this is so related to spiral dynamics and the evolution of consciousness or integral theory. So Rigel Thurston has been talking with CBAX, and he's been making the rounds in the corner. I don't know if Rigel's here yet, but this is, in my mind, this is very related to spiral dynamics and the evolution of consciousness, because with perhaps the first generation, the greatest generation, it was very much you do your duty. That's sincerity culture. Your feelings, they would probably say your feelings don't matter. This is very much Ben Shapiro. Facts don't care about your feelings. And which is, he's like my age, but that's such a like boomer greatest generation thing to say. Actually, the boomers weren't quite this. And then there started to be this transition toward the sincerity culture that came out of the 50s, 60s, 70s. I just watched the Dylan biopic. Excellent. I love that movie. I feel like they really, quick aside, I feel like they really captured in A Complete Unknown what it would have been like to hear Dylan sing those songs for the first time. And really, I watched a little YouTube clip with Edward Norton, who did an excellent job in the movie. And he was talking about the director really trying to make it personal in a sense. They wanted to capture what it was like to be there. Excuse me, sneeze mic. And I think they did a great job. But anyhow, that kind of culture, the 60s and the 70s, created the parents that then created the millennials, which are a big authenticity culture. That's me. And we really, really care about authenticity. But then back to Zizek, what's hard about the authentic parenting that leads with, I want you to want this, is that it's either that more deeply colonizing thing, which is like which demands the free choice, but it probably demands the free choice before the person is able to live into that freedom. Because the way that natural human development works, you could think about it in terms of classical schools, right? There's the grammar phase, the logic phase, the rhetorical phase, and that's all happening K through 12. But really, a lot, because of delayed adolescence, a lot of people don't really get to some kind of a true fall from grace and individuation. I mean, they're struggling with that in the teenage years, but they don't really get that way often now. I don't know, in the 20s and 30s, a lot of times, 40s maybe, if ever. And so eventually I've been going through personal stuff in my life where I've been talking to someone, and I can't talk about the specifics of it here, but like, part of the amazing part of the spiral, because these things happen culturally. Part of spiral dynamics and integral theory is that these things are happening culturally and socially, but they're also happening personally, because these things are, this fractal reality happens everywhere. And so like, you're a child, you learn rules, the 30 by 30 or whatever. I was just listening to the Afriel Pilotzen and Noah, President Foxman, and Ups Harris talking about this with their gaming stuff in their most recent 30 by 30 thing. And I got to narrow this down. I can't even keep track of myself, let alone you guys. And so there's part of this natural individuation happening. It's happening with my kids right now who are teenagers, is that you have to, you're learning the rules, you're doing the things, and then you have to have a fall from that, a separation from like a little kid. They kind of live in this constant world of play and imagination and Peter Pan, and where the difference between play and reality is something they don't even really gauge, because they haven't dropped into that logic phase, analytical judgment thing. And so you have to do that. But then what happens from that is this, Peter Rollins will talk about this a lot. It's very like Oedipus, Jungian, unconscious, subconscious, is that you have a fall and you realize there's the other. And to realize the kind of true individuated I, then you know that there's an other, and there's a gap there, and there's a separation, and you get this self-reflexivity. And with that becomes a loss from the kind of oceanic oneness of like not even having the capacity to see that analysis and make those judgments. Now, none of this has anything to do with reality necessarily. This is all perspectival stuff. Well, I'll go back on that. Does this have something to do with reality? Because that's a point that they came up with in that 30 minutes conversation. Is Noah had this brilliant little story about how these two different within this game, they had two different guns. And they found that like these two guns were statistically identical. But then they found that like the gamers thought that the one gun was better, and then they played with that gun statistically in a way that was better and superior to the other gun. But in the metrics, in the code of the game, they were identical, except they looked different, and the one had more base. And so then they were trying to figure out like, why are they playing with this one gun as if it's better? Because it's identical. And it was like a double slit experiment where, because the gamers thought the gun was better and perceived the gun to be better, it had an effect, a true real effect, like a placebo or something, that the gun acted better in the world. That's the hard problem of all perception. And so so your perception is tied to reality. That's the point I'm trying to get at. I don't want to fall into that subjective objective divide. And so you have this fall from grace in this spiral. And so it's not just like a follow the rules, which is almost like I don't know what stage, if Rigel's here, what stage that would be at the evolution of conscious, or like the evolution. That would be like probably a blue traditional thing. Just obey the rules, sincerity culture, just do it. And then you realize like, no, it's better. True freedom lies in like the wanting, also the wanting to do it. So then you have the recognition of that, and so then you parent the kid or the culture or the society and like, oh, we need to want these things. But the problem is that your wanting of something, this is actually a lot of these books on like Luther, The Bondage of the Will, Jonathan Edwards, The Freedom of the Will. These are aspects of like my Calvinist upbringing that are really good and true, is that your desire is not beholden to your will, at least not in like in a way where you can just affect it instantly. It's embedded in time, and you can affect your choices now can affect the desire of your future self, but your choices now cannot affect your desire. You can't change what you desire now. It's impossible. You can change what you desire in the future by taking small measured steps toward becoming the kind of person who has desires. And so you fall in that individuated teenage. I feel like that's where we are culturally right now. This is what Zizek is talking about, is like parentally and culturally, we're in that teenage phase where we're like, it's a Roman 7 thing. The good that I want to do, I don't do. And the good that I don't, and the bad that I don't want to do, I find myself continually doing. Who will save me from this body of destruction? Oh, thanks be to God. We're kind of in that phase, and it's a kind of unintended authoritarian tyranny that can feel overwhelming, demanding authenticity. But the problem is you can't demand authenticity, because authenticity and the desire can only be received with meekness. You can only receive that because it is a gift, and you can act accordingly to it. It's not something that you don't have agency in, because you have to receive the gift. But the gift is almost like this is very much like the Church of the Contradiction in Peter Rollins. It's like, and I've been saying this recently in my own life. I said this in Estuary. We had Estuary last Saturday, and because we were talking about relationships and the struggle of relationships and the struggle of communication. And the fact that very often, many people in our group found themselves in relationships where there was some deep felt need that they had, that they feel like was not resonated in their partner. Like there's some kind of frequency, was the word that I think we kind of settled on, or resonance, that I feel deeply in me that my partner doesn't resonate. And that feels like that can feel like a really deep loss, and again, this is like a sincerity, authenticity thing. Does that matter? Well, yes, it does matter, but it depends. If you demand the authenticity from your spouse to resonate on that frequency, the problem is they can't. You're demanding something of them that they're unable to accomplish, because that's not who they are right now. But what you should want but I think a reasonable response and requirement and desire of your spouse is that you should want them to want that, even if they don't currently have it. You should want them to want to be transformed toward the kind of person who can give you perhaps someday what you want, but right now, like the Rolling Stones, they maybe can't give you what you want, but they can give you what you need, which is maybe to not have your needs fulfilled. That's the curse. That's the freedom from the libidinal pursuit of the lack in the Church of the Contradiction, is not wanting what you want in the moment. And then hopefully, and that's simultaneous, I think that's synonymous with receiving with meekness the implanted word, which hopefully will end up giving you what you want in the future. But it'll be transformed in that, because the kind of forgiveness and humility that's in that won't change. Again, they won't change the facts, but they will change the meaning. And it will be very much like your perception of reality will be changed. And then in that, guess what? Reality will be changed. It's Franz Jägerstätter in prison in a hidden life, and just be like, if you just do this, you'll free. And he's like, I am free. My freedom is not contingent upon the facts of whether or not I'm in a cage. It's bigger than that. It's other than that. And so, I got to fulfill the doctrinal intersectionality thing in hell. I haven't even got there. Damn it. I'm 20 minutes in, and we got to get there, and then I'll open this up. So, so we were talking in the Signal chat about hell, and we were, because a big question that comes up around these doctrines of hell. Okay, 20 minutes in, we're starting to talk about hell now. Sorry, timestamp it. Make good on the title. I'm trying. Is that many people will say, this is one of the frequent pushbacks of me talking about universalism and being a universalist, or when Nate and Jordan Daniel Wood and I had the conversation, or anyone, is they will say, this is not something that should be taught publicly. Oh, just a second. Pause. Okay. Sorry. Some parental things still going on. Okay. So back to hell. Should you or should you not teach explicitly about universalism? And people will say, well, there's negative side effects to that, because then this is no matter what we say, it doesn't matter, because people are still saying this. Like Jacob, I'm looking at you, no matter what I end up saying, or Chezi tries to say, or JD comes on your streams and tries to say, is that this is not what we're saying, but it doesn't really matter. Tell me about the God you don't believe in. I probably don't believe in it either. Tell me about the Christian universalism you don't believe in. I probably don't believe in it either, etc. Because we so often quote George MacDonald is like, you will not get out until you've paid the last farthing. Nobody gets away with anything. I believe in justice. God's justice is his mercy. Those two things are unified in the person of God. So you're not getting away with anything. But anyhow, that's an aside. We've talked about that a lot. I just said it again. People still won't hear it. It doesn't matter. So, but here's the thing. This is the intersectionality part, is there are different people will hear different things no matter what your perspective on hell is, no matter what you preach from a pulpit, whether it's eternal conscious torment or infernalism or the traditional view, primarily in the West. People argue for it. Father Stephen DeYoung apparently argues for it, although I haven't gone deep into what he says about it, and I'm sure there's a lot of nuance. You can argue for a conditional immortality view or an annihilation view. There are problems with it. There are moral implications for it. There are certain people who are going to hear it and then make choices in their life because they have not had the proper freedom of authenticity and understanding, and due to their own ignorance, who will take that message and run with it in certain ways, which will have what is potentially considered to be bad effects on their life. People will say that about universalism, that if you preach universalism, people will think that their choices don't matter, even though I'm saying that's not what I'm saying. You don't get away with anything. If that's what you think I'm saying, or the kind of universalism that I'm proposing, that will. And here's the thing, it probably still will happen. People who will adopt a universalism, even though I say you don't get away with anything, and you won't get out of hell until you paid the last farthing, and I still believe in hell. It doesn't mean that I don't believe hell doesn't exist. I'm kind of agnostic about all that stuff. There will still be people who hear that, who then make choices that don't lead them into the kind of authentic freedom, which is where you want to do what you're supposed to do, that Zizek was talking about. Like, that will happen for every view on hell. This is the intersectionality problem. Because you can point back to just as many examples of people, if you teach infernalism, who will deconstruct, deny the faith, say God is a moral monster and I won't serve him. And then again, those people, you could say, then those people will say, well, that's not what God is, though, and you have it wrong. Again, right? It's the communism that hasn't been tried, right? Because whenever you're an ideologue, your viewpoint is a totalizing, your viewpoint is a totalizing thing. And this gets one of the other criticisms of when we've had the streams about universalism, is that it's totalizing. And so whenever you totalize something, you absolutize it, it becomes the Ouroboros, and it's a closed systems, and then there will be negative personal applications of that ideology that lead the person into what we would deem to be bad behaviors. Again, if you get into the quantum stuff, maybe those behaviors are necessary and they could not have done anything otherwise, or they could have, but when they made the decision, it was determined, and then that fractal reality in the multiverse was set. And so like potentially someone else could have done something otherwise, but they exist in an alternate dimension. Okay, you could say this about Calvinism. You could say this about the perceived determinism and double predestination of Calvinism, is that if you teach Calvinism, there are some people who will run with that say that it doesn't matter what I do. There isn't any freedom, so it doesn't matter. And so they will go into despair or just a loss of faith. Does that mean then you shouldn't teach Calvinism? This argument doesn't work. It doesn't work for any doctrine. This is the doctrinal intersectionality. You don't rewatch it stoned. Okay, did you not understand the point that I just made, Paul? Any doctrine that you teach will have negative ramifications for different persons. And so then what do? Not teach any doctrinal distinctives? Well, then you have to be a mystic. Maybe this is what Karl Rahner meant by the Christian of the future will be a mystic, or not at all. But this, I would say, is something that we culturally and globally now, because of the technology that we now have, which has created a global conversation with this Gutenberg 2.0 internet, there is no wishing this away. There is no romantic return to the printing press where we have institutions built on the literal written word. You can't go back to that. It ain't going to happen. You can wish in one hand, shit in the other, see which fills first. Thank you, Grandpa. There is no getting away from it. So that argument is bad. So then what do? Well, you could say you just don't teach on distinctives from the pulpit. But guess what? You get into textual intersectionality with the Bible. If you go with just like, well, we just believe the Bible. Which verses? Then you get into red letter Christians, or you get into the Thomas Jefferson Bible, or you get into the problems of sola scriptura. Is because what you see and hear depends a lot upon where you're standing and the kind of person you are, which has familial, national, cultural, ethnic, linguistic problems to it. Different people will see different things and emphasize salience, different things in the text, because there is no universal view from nowhere. So you're going to get into intersectionality problems with everything. So then what do? I think what we do is we tell the truth or we don't lie, especially to ourselves. And I think that it's always himself that the coward betrays first. After that, all other betrayals comes easily. I think it's this picture. Each according to the dictates of his own conscience. Consciousness and conscience congress. Consciousness and conscience conference. I don't think you can betray your conscience. Dostoevsky, above all, tell the truth, especially to yourself. Or when Jordan Peterson says, if you lie, especially to yourself, you will poison your own well and your own faculty for discerning truth, which is why we have psychologists, which is why Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you'll call it fate. Sincerity culture is great, but authenticity culture is necessary. Although you cannot insist and demand for the authenticity from outside. It has to come from within, because receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls, and the kingdom of God is within you. All right, I don't have much else to say, and I don't have much hope that I will be heard from using language as a mechanism, because Guess what? That's mammon. That's a mammon. That's a mammon. This is a cup, PVK, that my family got for me. It's like a Christmas present or something. Wise guy. All right. I'm going to pin this. And I might read a Viktor Frankl quote, because you only really understand anything from love if I can find it. And then people can come in and play if they want. I will look through some comments. But see, this is impossible, PVK. We might not understand you, but we do love you. Again, you may have the fact is, no man understands anything. When he understands that is his first tottering step, not towards understanding, but towards the capacity of one day understanding. That George MacDonald quote. We have to want what we do not want. I think that you want to understand me, which is embedded in love. And if we continue to live into that, we will one day understand. Because knowledge will pass away. And the love won't. Okay, I'm going to try to find that Viktor Frankl quote because it's excellent. And then I'm going to look at the comments. Also, I took this picture. This is for the people who know. This is an Ozempic ad or something, or semi-glutide. This over here is churros. This is no churros. Okay, that's an inside joke. But I don't think the people who know that inside joke watch my videos consistently. I hate the new iPhone app because I don't know where all my pictures are. Listen, I need my quotes at the ready. Okay? I want the quotes. This is, so Michael Lady, my good friend Michael, had always talked about this Viktor Frankl quote, and it's so good. There's a Simone Weil quote. I have a lot of good quotes in here. I don't know how to find it, though, quickly. So if somebody... Churros. Okay, I'm looking. Don't judge me. Maybe that's it. Yes. Okay. Here it is. Ready? Love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality. That hidden, that colonized, that authentic, secret, sacred self, Paul. That inside thing, which is awesome if you don't fall into the subjective objective divide. It's the seed. It's the potential. It's not the fullness. It's not the tree, but it's the seed. It's the inner, the inner man. Love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality. No one can become fully aware of the very essence of another human being unless he loves him. Stephen, talking about love a lot. By his love, he is enabled to see the essential traits and features in the beloved person, and even more, he sees that which is potential in him. Oh, wow. I forgot about this, but he's talking about the seed. Here you go. To see that which is potential in him, which is not yet actualized, but yet ought to be actualized. Ought. Again, that's that ought. That's that freedom. This quote is perfect. Damn it, my streams are great. I wasn't even trying to do this. I didn't even know what I was doing because I talk ahead of my head. Furthermore, by this love, the loving person enables the beloved person to actualize these potentialities. So by not demanding on them, but by loving them, and by being hospitable and gardening them, which has the proper balance and dance of constraint and freedom, protection. Because one of the things I was wanting to talk about too, I'll finish reading the quote, but I'm going to talk about safetyism and then read comments. So furthermore, by his love, the loving person enables the beloved person to actualize these potentialities. By making him aware of what he can be and of what he should become, he makes these potentialities come true. You agape them into being. And that's lovely. That's really, really good. And Viktor Frankl went through some hard shit. He knows some hard things about life and being and all that stuff. Because safetyism, what safetyism is essentially, I think safetyism is rooted in fear, every form of safetyism, and it's saying we need to put these absolute constraints on our culture, on our children, on ourselves, that will protect us from the scary things that are the unknown that we don't know. But then that becomes the devouring mother, the well-intended devouring mother that inhibits your it is the anti-love that inhibits your potential from actualizing. Out of a merely felt desire to protect and love you. And that's the hard part with it, is because like it's felt as love, but really what it is fear, and it's inhibiting your actualization, which is necessary for your becoming who you truly are, the White Stone name. Okay, I'm going to look at comments. And I just got a thing of McMobile.
Good morning. What's up, dude?
What up? Hey.
I'm in
You're
Las
looking
Vegas.
pretty orthodox with that beard, brother.
The city of sin, Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm here on a work trip.
Are you sinning?
Yeah.
Okay. Are these shirts, are these dots designed? Yeah, they're designed.
Yeah, that's part of Luke's theological intersectionality. Because he's
right.
a manly man, but he wears designer shirts.
Listen, this is like, I'm like Shia LaBeouf. He had some video once where he's just like, this hobo look takes a lot of work.
You're
He's like, this is
bold
all
LaBeouf.
very intentional. Huh?
You're bold LaBeouf. Instead of Shia.
Bold?
Sorry. It's early here, you know. It's only 7:51. The jokes aren't really coming through yet. But I did want to ask you, and I can't stay long because I gotta go LARP as unto the Lord. Yeah, but what's the you said something about intersectionality of faith, of a philosophy, of a, you know, what you said, you mentioned it in a Signal group chat that I'm not a part of. So you were saying something about intersectionality
I'll try to reiterate it succinctly, but the doctrinal intersectionality part is when I start talking about hell, and it's basically the idea of when people say you can't speak of universalism because people will hear that and there will be unintended side effects where like people will say, well, it doesn't matter what I do, or there's no hell, or I'll just get away with things, or there's no justice, which is nothing that I'm saying. But irregardless, there are people, even though I'm explicitly saying that's not what I think, who will hear that and who will behave in ways based on what I hear that are whatever, potentially bad choices. But my intersectionality point is that happens with every doctrine of hell. You can't get away from that.
So the intersectionality point is, I don't know if you're using that term in the way that it's regularly understood, right?
Probably not.
So maybe we need to do some clarification statements, like, because the intersectionality thing is like, you know, I'm black and I'm a woman, so I'm double oppressed. So are you just saying that you're like an anarchist and orthodox, so you're doubly oppressed theologically?
No. Well, so no, okay, right. So this is why I'm confusing. I'm probably not using the right term. Maybe I'm just pointing out my understanding of intersectionality, maybe it's just a critical theory point, is that it's essentially the idea is that whenever you absolutize any identity marker or any ideological viewpoint, there are, because not everyone is actually the same, you're gonna run into problems.
Okay. Yeah, I think the intersectionality thing, that word probably just overcomplicates it, because even it as it's normally understood.
I wouldn't overcomplicate something.
Well, because it's just like, it's personalism, right? It's the individual is the locus of all meaning. That's the real, you know.
Yes.
That's the hits you're playing right now. I get it. Okay, I got you.
But then when it comes to hell, like, what are you going to do with that? Because that's the critique, right, that I get, is that I talk about universalism and people will say, well, there's no justice in the world, or people get away from things, and so then they'll just, like, you know, civil society will just fall apart, you know? But I'm just like, or people will lose their faith because of universalism. And my point is, like, you're going to run into similar but related and different problems no matter what you say about hell. So then what's the answer? Nobody just talks about hell at all? Why am I the only one who can't talk about hell? And then that gets into my systemic institutional injustice shit where I'm just like, just because you have the bully pulpit doesn't mean I have to shut up.
Well, it looks like you've got more guests now, so I'm going to go back to listening, but I'm glad I could straighten that out for everyone. Also, I love you. I'm glad you're streaming this morning. Bye, everyone.
Hello.
What up, C-Money?
How's it going, man?
Not too bad.
And
also,
found a lot of
Alan,
stuff really interesting, and I wanted to start vibing with you, see if we could go back
and
forth a little bit.
Do it. I want to answer this question quick. Can I not talk about hell? Apparently not. Lance, you can add yourself whenever you want or not. Okay, go ahead, buddy. C-Money, hit it.
So I think there's something about an individual relationship with what's good that lies beyond the realm of linguistic simplicity. However, that's a sort of individual, almost like a Gnostic interaction. But then if you want to communicate that to somebody else, you have to kind of take that sacred experience and translate it into a profane, separate linguistic thing that is then able to be, I don't know, re-embodied by somebody else. And then they can theoretically go through that participatory experience with you. So in that way, we're kind of using words like mammon or like spells to then impart a participatory change in the other person. So the necessary means of communication is using this specific tool. But then when we say, hey, the information is this specific tool, then it's very easy for the audience to hear, oh, information is in the tool. Let me grab the tool and parrot the tool, regurgitate the tool, repeat the tool, structure the tool, formulate the tool, and then I'll get the gold. And it's like, whoa, no. Actually, the gold is some sort of individual relation. And so, yeah, I thought that you were talking about how once you start talking, that turns it into mammon. And then once people hear mammon, then they start to get possessed, and they possess go to hell. And so there's something about a good relation and how you communicate how to properly relate that then needs to use a fallen tool of abstracted literal mammon. Okay, but that's not actually the path to get there. That's just that's just you talk about.
Yes, like I love almost everything you said. There's some additions that I would clarify, because essentially what you're saying is like that Gnostic inner thing, the essence of what you're feeling and thinking and believing. And then it comes out. I don't think when it comes out in language, it has to fall into the profane and be mammon. And I think part of that comes from the place of true speech within the person. Like if you're an integrated person and you speak, it's just real. Sure. But I mean, you have to be essentially saintly. That's my idea of iconic thinking, and I think that's the goal. And like Phlebas would push back on me and say like that's only possible in the eschaton. But I think we get glimmers of it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that subjective experience you were just talking about. I find it dangerous when you then communicate it, and then that communication is objectified by other people.
Sure.
And then that object is not pure. Yes, your expression of it was pure, but then once it is expressed, once it is fallen, it is then no longer the pure subjective. It becomes a fallen object, and then it is no longer worthy of transmitting the same experience. And
totally, but that's why everything is received with meekness, the implanted word. If you don't receive with meekness the implanted word, and this is why I say when Malcolm Guite says meaning is not conveyed, it's awakened. That's what I'm talking about.
Definitely.
You can receive, if you objectify what I'm saying and absolutize it, then it's becoming profane. You are bastardizing it in your reception of it. Then it's not an icon. You're making it an idol.
Yeah. Icon idol. Okay. Yeah.
Completely. You probably just helped me be more clear than I've been in the first 30 minutes of talking about this.
Well, that was my goal. I'm glad to help.
Good.
So yeah, I think there's a lot into this. So what you were just talking about reminds me a lot of the Cain and Abel spirit.
Okay.
And so in this sense, Cain is the farmer who is safe and insured, and Abel is that which can confront the wilderness. He is able to confront chaos. So then when we start talking about doctrines or information or using the words, Abel is the person that can use that tool to then have an original participation in an embodied relation with it. And Cain is the person who just rote memorizes, regurgitates, parrots it back out. And so then when you spread doctrines to people of a Cain-like spirit, they seek to regurgitate the doctrine for the sake of regurgitating the doctrine and to get the reward. But if you spread that same doctrine to an able-bodied spirit or an able-bodied mind, then they are seeking that with meekness in trying to transform, and they are using that as a humble action to reorient their personality. And so what you're actually trying to do is communicate the spirit of humility, or the community, or the spirit of able-bodied to react responsibly to chaos.
Yes.
Which then somehow undercuts the spirit of Cain that needs to follow the doctrine and the letter of the law and just regurgitate.
Yeah. It's the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law, which is kind of like, yeah, I totally agree with that, which is kind of like what I was saying when I was trying to say, you have to want what you don't want. Because what you want is the profane objective thing.
Right.
That's the thing that you can clearly
because
name and articulate.
That as the source of orientation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the map, not the territory, not the reality.
Correct. And I think that's the fundamental fall from grace. I think that's what it means to be self-conscious. I think that's what it means to be an ego, is to think, no, this is my map and the map is real.
Yes, but where I often, I want to see what you think about this, because where part of where I want to take this, and I think we're having enough understanding where we can go here, is that I think there's a lot of people, and Chad's here. I don't know if this is what Chad means by spiritual anonymity, but I think there's a way where you can say, well, we just shouldn't talk about these things then, because we fall into the objective thing and everybody fights, which is essentially ideology. Like,
so
identitarianism is that, where everybody's fighting about their absolute ideas. And so then they say, well, we shouldn't just do that. We should go back to the sincerity culture, where we don't, like the Zizek thing, where we don't insist that someone wants to have this conversation about ideas or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think my gut reaction is something like a yin yang, or like the McGill-Christian hypothesis, McGill-Christ maneuver, the either or and both and of the hemispheres. And so, yes, you need to use the idols, and you need to use the symbols, and you need to use those specific words to transmit something. But you also have to realize that those are embodied. And so you use the tool, and then it's embodied. You use the tool, and then it's embodied. When you use the tool, and then you use the tool, and then you use the tool, then you get in this self-fulfilling echo chamber, spiraling feedback loop into insanity. And I think that's the danger and the temptation of using mammon as a role to transformation, because then you use it for its own sake, and then it spirals out of control, and then you lack that internal participation, and then you are not being a vessel for the Spirit of God. You are chasing something you think you already know. And so then you're egocentrically motivated, oriented towards your sapiential framework, and reaffirming the fluency of your sapiential frameworks, and kind of being disembodied from the moment or something like that. I don't know.
Right. I
just said that to myself. But fair enough.
No. Yeah, it's good. Are you familiar? Where I want to go with this though now is to talk about deconstruction, the U-shaped journey. Are you familiar enough with the corner that have you heard the term the U-shaped journey?
No, but if it's like a strange loop, co-causal interdependent loop, I get the underlying idea.
Right. So I'll explain it in the way that I understand it. Jess in our corner has talked about this a lot, but he says it's essentially a narrative. It's a story framework of like how everything happens, Lord of the Rings, like there's this fall from grace, there's this terrible catastrophe, but then in there's some sort of weird flip where things get changed. It's like Tolkien called it a eucatastrophe, where this terrible thing happens, but then in that, and the resolution of that is like a more beautiful thing. And Jess would call it, the pattern of all creation. And so this is the thing with the loop that we're talking about, and getting caught in that loop, and deconstruction is that when someone, I think, is faithful to mammon in a sense, like even, because let's say this for me, Sola Scriptura was this for me. I was like in a closed loop of rational Sola Scriptura where I really believed it, or I thought I really believed it, where I was just like, we need to believe the Bible. But then where that led me was into the doctrine of hell because I was exposed to this debate on YouTube between Chris Day, an annihilationist, and then a traditionalist, somebody who's advocating for eternal conscious torment. Except Chris Day is like he's a very intense Baptisty, Reformed, Sola Scriptura evangelical. Like, he's like, the Bible is the authority, which I would disagree with him now. But anyhow, he thought that. And I watched this debate, and he annihilated this traditionalist guy based on textual exegesis. So then me, as somebody who's like a believer in Sola Scriptura, I was caught in this like liminal place of like, what the hell, pun intended, of just like, okay, the guy who just won this debate has the wrong viewpoint. What do I like? So what do I do like with that? Huh?
Sorry, that was like sophistry. That triggered me to another comment in the TLC. Sorry, go on.
So, but then what happened is like I followed my false belief in Sola Scriptura into the doctrine of hell and really started studying the Bible and went on this path for 10 years where I became an annihilationist for a while. And whatever. And eventually I became a universalist, a self-identifying universalist. But all of that was like the label of infernalist, annihilationist, universalist are adjectives, right? Vervaeke talks about adverbial. My adverbial posture has always been that I'm one who's open to the truth outside the truth I currently apprehend, which is really the thing that is beyond the limited idol of whatever I conceive the map of that name to mean.
A fundamentally humble disposition.
Hopefully. And so if you follow that mammon journey faithfully, you'll see it to its death. And then death will become a seed of new birth.
Yeah, so I come from a philosophy background, and a lot of philosophy is taking an argument to its logical conclusion. And there's something about taking an argument to its logical conclusion where you kind of realize it's self-referential, or Gödel's incompleteness theorem, or strange loops, or however you want to look at it. You can't rationalize your way into embodied applicability. Like, once you go into that rationalization, you get into a feedback loop. Shit, I got lost. I forgot what the point of that was, but it felt relevant.
Well, what you made me think of there, like, this is one of my favorite, it's one of my quotes that I have in my repository of quotes, but like, this is an old tweet that I had, but like, you can't reason with a rationalist that rationalism is irrational.
Fair.
Or like, you can't think your way out of a prison made of thoughts. It's the same thing.
Right. So now that got me back on my train of thought. So philosophy is trying to take everything to its logical conclusion. And when you come to a logical conclusion, you reach a state of aporia. And aporia is like, we can get no further. Our principles are no longer working. And so in that state of taking it to its logical conclusion of reaching aporia, you come to consciousness with the fact that your previous framework was insufficient or was self-referential or something like that. And so then philosophy is the process of taking every idea to its logical conclusion of aporia, which means you actually didn't know what you were talking about to begin with. Yes. And so the process of philosophy and seeking knowledge is actually realizing how all the things you thought you know aren't actually meaningful. And so all the ways that you're taking the world for granted, all of your presumptions, all of your arrogant entitlement is probably kind of based on an illusion of what you think, you know, and something like that. Yeah. So then philosophy would be a practice of humility, because you're recognizing that the structures that you've built your personality on are actually like dead wood. And so then if you go through alchemical philosophy and then you burn off the old parts of your personality, you're actually burning off yourself, but it's actually just burning off dumb ideas. And then something about realizing that all your ideas are dumb then makes you humble in relation to ideas. And then that's the counter to the Luciferian spirit that says my intellectual ideas are God. And so you go and you relate in a way to find your intellectual ideas insufficient, so that you are not so obsessed or possessed by the spirit of the intellectual idea.
Yes. Which is essentially what you're talking about is
to counter that. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, I mean, what you're talking about is what I call iconic thinking. And I think it's the move away from the limited Luciferian ideological thinking, where you inherently understand. And that's when I talk about universalism, I'm trying to convey that, where like when I say universalism, like I have a irreducible mosaic of what that means. And if you think that I'm trying to hand that to you as this like Luciferian object that's whole and complete, not lacking in anything, That's not what I'm doing. I can't do that. No one can do that. I know that's an illusion. That's a delusion. And so, and I'm aware of that. But God is he about whom we must never speak, and we must always keep speaking. It's the first commandment and the second, held in tension and acted accordingly. You know.
So is your idea of universalism is more like a fingerprint?
My idea of everything is like a finger pointing, but that doesn't mean that I don't.
No. Not a finger point, a fingerprint.
Oh, I don't know. I'm not following.
Well, it sounds like, well, it's I guess the root of it would be something like epistemic humility, something like that, in that I can't speak for you or whomever. This is what I know today in this moment as something that is of truth and value. So this is what I understand to be true. But it's there's room for change possibly, but not in this moment, but maybe tomorrow or something. And it's not prescriptive. So it's like your universalism is each person has, and I get it, dude. Like that makes sense to me. I mean, other than to say something like, my name is Chad, and I mean, I believe you, like, that's very specific. So that fact doesn't change, at least not today. It doesn't. But you see what I'm saying? Because like the way that sometimes I was hearing or maybe some people were hearing your universalism is that almost prescriptive. Even though I know you've never said that, you've actually stated the opposite. That's not prescriptive. It's more descriptive. So I guess what I'm understanding through this thing of is it's something that you travel through, not arrive at.
Yes, that's very true. However, I would add to that like I think both, just to bring up these people, Nate, Jordan, and I also have and this is going to come as a surprise to people, we do think the propositions and the distinctions between the three views matter. And I do think that the universalist perspective is superior. That's why I'm talking about it.
Yeah.
It's not, everything is relative, but things aren't arbitrary. That's the nature of relational ontology.
Like, personally, I've never had, except for when I was really young, such an obsession with hell. And it's so like, man, isn't there something more productive we could be doing? This is how I feel about it sometimes. And so then I get worried that the constant worry I have about it's a similar worry to if I see somebody walking into an AA meeting with a Biden T-shirt on, or a Let's Go Brandon shirt on. Like either way, it's like this isn't the place for it, guys. Like
right.
And so I get concerned about like losing our focus on what seems to me to be the main thing, which is I don't know, something more idealistic, because I'm a idealistic bitch.
But the problem,
like this morning, I had a conversation with somebody that I have a conversation with on Wednesday mornings, and I had to leave that conversation. Halfway through. I said, "Wait, I'm done with this. Can't do it. Sorry, but like it pissed me off, dude." And it was like, partly because I don't have an answer to such a complicated question, and he's provoking me to give a black and white answer to something that is not black and white, that I'm not willing to be responsible for. Something like, is it okay to nearly beat a man to death for being a flasher? Sorry, there's no quick answer to that problem. Sorry, there isn't. And if you're willing, I say yes, it's okay to do that if you're willing to take on the spiritual ramifications of that, go right ahead. But don't ask me to be the judge of this situation.
Well, this is,
Where does it
I've
stop?
I've already mentioned this in the conversation, Chad, but I know you love this movie too. It's very much a hidden life. It's that image that Malick does so well with Franz Jägerstätter, where he's just like, what Franz Jägerstätter does is the Cormac McCarthy quote, is he does not betray himself. It's the coward. It's always himself. The coward betrays first. After that, all other betrayals come easily. Franz Jägerstätter won't betray himself. He's like, I won't do that. I can't do it. But he simultaneously judges no one else for their actions. So like this, with this conversation you had with this guy, I think it sounds like to me you had good personal boundaries where you're just like, and a good understanding of your emotional regulation where you're just like, I can't do this conversation right now. I need to step away. And it sounds like you did it relatively with non-judgment, even though you adamantly disagreed with the framing of this guy wanting to set it up into a black and white. That's fantastic.
Oh, there's definitely judgment. I just had to get out of it before I expressed it inappropriately.
Well, that's wise too. That's good.
Hey, all right. Luke, do you mind if I steel man you a little bit? So people can understand. So somebody can understand it. And Chad, one of the things I think that you can kind of map into, if you want to understand where Luke's coming from, you have to read the Justice Sermon. Like if you're listening to these conversations on and kind of want to engage in this conversation, I would just highly recommend to read George MacDonald's Justice Sermon.
But,
yeah.
I've heard it. Let me finish that. Thing is like, I don't feel like I need to really understand Luke, what he's saying, because I know Luke and he's my bro. So that's just all I got to say. And I'll
well, and this is,
I get it.
Lance, this is
obviously, Chad, like I know you want to come in a lot of times and tell us what we can and can't talk about, but these are things that are interesting to some people. Maybe not every conversation is interesting to you. But what I want to talk about, Luke, which is, I watched the Jacob and Sam kind of live stream or whatever. By the way, two of my favorite people, love them to death. And I think to some extent, they didn't steel man what you've been trying to say, which is you've never tried to say that that the individual isn't going to go through a process where they're going to atone for, at one-ment for sin, true repentance. Like that's not anywhere part of what you're talking about. It's not a get out of jail free card. And even as you go on in his sermons, George MacDonald basically talked about anger with your brother is worse than murder. Like he makes the case, when he starts talking about that. So anyway, to frame this, these are just some sections out of the Justice Sermon, and it kind of gets to what Luke's talking about, but also it's going to get back into that Zizek conversation you're talking about, which is true freedom, right? And so basically after he set this up for a long time, he said, primarily God is not bound to punish sin. He is bound to destroy sin. If he were not the maker, he might not be bound to destroy sin. I do not know. But seeing he has created creatures who have sinned, and therefore sin has, by the creating act of God, come into the world, God in his own righteousness is bound to destroy sin. Then he goes on to talk about, punishment, I repeat, is not the thing required of God, but the absolute destruction of sin. What better is the world? What better is the sinner? What better is God? What better is the truth that the sinner should suffer, continuing suffering to all eternity? I'm skipping through here a little bit. For evil in the abstract, nothing can be done. It is eternally evil. But he's talking about George, the me, the who he is, but I may be saved from it by learning to loathe, to hate it, to shrink from it with an eternal avoidance. The only vengeance worth having on sin is to make the sinner himself its executioner. Sin and punishment are in no antagonism to each other in man, any more than pardon and punishment are in God. They can perfectly coexist. He goes on, the path across the gulf that divides right from wrong is not the fire, but repentance. It's the total transformation of the mind, body, and spirit aligned into the will of God, to be in communion with God. That is it. And to see your sin, you, Luke, your free self, right? Not being said, I need to get, so for example, what he's talking about in that parenting deal is, you can say you have freedom, but I'm going to try and guilt the hell out of you into wanting to do something, right? I'm going to try to manipulate you. And we've seen a lot of that happening. We've seen it in the church. Now we're seeing it out of the blue church. And luckily, a lot of that's being resoundingly repudiated across society here recently. But it's talking about the individual. And so true freedom comes not that. So for example, if God just punishes and then he saves me without any repentance, what unity, what at-one-ment, what atonement is that? The true unity, the true unity, the true atonement is when you yourself recognize, fourth and fifth step, Chad, your own wrongs and your own patterns, and then you set on a path towards forgiveness, and you make direct amends to people. Like you actually make an amend. An amend is just not an I'm sorry. Sometimes it includes restitution of money stolen, all sorts of things, right? And it's whether that person accepts it or not. And so when we look at George, he's basically recognizing, and I think the reason why when you were talking about Zizek earlier in that true freedom he was getting to, these portions of George MacDonald's justice sermon were ringing in the back of my head, because what I think he's talking about is you are in participation with the Creator, with God, who ultimately, through his love and his draw and everything else, and through seeing him, you look on yourself, you say, oh my gosh, I loathe this sin in me, right? And it's not to just create this situation where we're born with, so here he goes, I am not now, however, dealing with the question of the duration of punishment, but with the idea of punishment itself. I would only say in passing that the notion that a creature born imperfect, nay, born with impulses to evil, not of his own generating, and which he could not help having, a creature to whom the true faith of God was never presented, and by whom it never could have been seen, should be thus condemned as is loathsome a lie against God as could find place in heart too undeveloped to understand what justice is, and too low to look up into the face of Jesus, right? God is bound by his love to punish sin in order to deliver his creature. He is bound by his justice to destroy sin in his creation. Love is justice, is the fulfilling of the law, for God as well as for his children. This is the reason of punishment. This is why justice requires that the wicked shall not go unpunished, that they, through the eye-opening power of pain, may come to see and do justice, may be brought to desire and make all possible amends, and so become just. Such punishment concerns justice in the deepest degree. For justice, that is God, is bound in himself to see justice done by his children, not in the mere outward act, but in their very soul and being. He is bound in himself to make up for the wrong done by his children, and he can do nothing to make up for wrong done but by bringing about the repentance of the wrongdoer. So Luke, like when you're, I think that's my steel manning, right? So that's if you're listening when Luke talks about these things, he's speaking, and so where George MacDonald ultimately gets to is that because God's going to do this for each and every single one of his children, and that ultimately that everyone will pay the last farthing, that everyone will come into a spirit of repentance and at-one-ment. And whatever that looks like, we don't know what that is, or so on and so forth. So at any rate, Luke, I'll be quiet, but as I was listening, I think George is talking to that very thing you were talking about with Zizek when he was talking about authority. Like true freedom is the sinner coming to themselves and wishing to destroy the sin in themselves. And that's when the father, because us as dads, when we are really pumped, is not when we have to tell our kids to say they're sorry. I don't want to apologize to my sister. I don't care. You just smacked her over the head with the toy. You're going to apologize to her when you're 4, right? But when they catch themselves in the act of doing something wrong and they want to make it, like you see, like, oh my gosh, he's 13. He did something. I didn't even get to him. And he went to his sister and he made an amend or whatever it is. Like you see it in action. You're like, bravo.
Okay. Sorry, I have to do some administrative things. Listen,
Luke
people
is
who are
be loving or else.
people
Be
are
loving or else.
That's right. people who have wrenches on my thing, you gotta manage the chat. Listen, like calling people babies and then swearing at each other and stuff, not cool. Okay. Also, Joseph, get back in here. I was just gonna say, Joseph, what do you want to talk about? And then you left. You maybe have things to do. I wanted to ask you about your censor. Anyhow, thank you. I want to hear what Alan has to say. Thank you for the steel manning, Lance. I always love you. I think what C Money and I were talking about, to me, a little bit is even the thing behind the thing behind the thing. And I appreciate the steel manning because I think what you said is right. But the problem is like, and I think I've lived enough to know that, like, if you are in the adverbial mode of using language as a way to just try to give someone a whole and complete object, like to give them that Luciferian thing in a transactional way and just think they're going to understand it, they won't understand it. That's that Viktor Frankl love quote. And that's what I say to anyone. You're not going to understand anyone unless you want to understand them. And if you want, but that requires of you a kind of kenosis, a kind of self-emptying. You have to let go of your own ideologies to really understand the other, to have an at-one-ment, which is what the communication and communion is. You're not going to have that without that. So, like, the conversation is useless if the two people aren't doing that, and especially the Christians, which is why the Christians should we have to learn to die to our own ideas and die to our own cultures to somewhat, trampling down death by death. Anyhow, Alan, C Money.
Yeah, I wanted to make a point about the metaphorical substrate of what you were just talking about there. You kept talking about adverbs and adjectives. Yep. And to me, this gets back to McGilchrist in relations are primary to the relata.
Yes.
And so in that sort of sense, I think any sort of true speech ought to be verbial or adverbial in nature. We ought to be speaking about processes or about events or about actions.
Yes.
But the problem is mammon or normal communication or generalized thinking or keeping up with the Joneses or how you post on Twitter or using common language almost brings with it the implication of a noun or adjective sort of metaphorical substrate, a sort of thingified interpretation of it.
It's much faster. It's expedient.
To bring that up. Yeah.
No, I agree with you 100%. That's why we're in this. It's not, this is why I talk about McLuhan so much. Like, the medium is the message. The fact that we're in a world of institutions that are built upon the written word and what that means, like when McLuhan says the medium is the message is necessarily constricted by the medium of the written word.
Sure.
That's why we're identitarians.
And that's why I think the profane conversation is when you talk to generalized public, because it decontextualizes it out like that, it then nounifies it, and then it desubjectifies it. By objectifying it, you are cutting it off from a living embodiment. And so it becomes really tough to communicate because you have to be switching back and forth from a disembodied word to an embodied meaning, and then what does the word mean? And then meaning is an action of the audience or of the speaker, of the participator. It isn't inherently objectively valued in the object itself.
Nope. And I think that's what I'm always trying to do, which is why I'm confusing, is I'm trying to call people out of that and embody it myself.
Right.
I mean, I really am.
But you have to use the thingified concepts to get them out.
Yes, of course.
But then they think you're talking in thingified concepts, and then they're lost.
Yes.
Right. So how do we reach these keys?
I don't know. Alan, how do we do it?
Yeah. Well, I think that's the metagelical, right? That's spreading the good news. That's spreading the kind of character that is able-bodied enough to mystify the language and have that original participatory imaginative experience of self-transformation and spread that disposition to engage in those transformational practices out into the community. Something like that.
I hope.
Well, where three or more are gathered, let's hope we can do something like that.
Yeah. Okay, Alan, what up, bud?
What's up? I think C Money's too smart for me. But I appreciated Lance's little talk he gave and agree with a lot of it. I guess the thing I wanted to add into the mix is the limitations and the where you're at is also part of, like, that's part of what makes it work. That's part of, like, also a gift of, like, we're always like, oh, well, if I just had the right words, or if I could just get my platform in the right way. But it's like the limitation is part of it. It's like, you can only have a magic show if you don't tell them how you're doing the magic trick. The not knowing is part of how it functions, in the same way that, like, yeah, I think a lot of the time we sort of like, well, if my kid just, if they were just mature and an adult, I wouldn't even have to parent them. But it's like, no, you've been given the gift of taking them through childhood to be an adult. And that's part of the good thing. It's not like, oh, well, if I could just throw them in the microwave and get them to be an adult in 30 seconds, like, that'd be better. It's like your relationship and your knowing of each other, the thing that will make them an adult is part of the fact that they need you, and, like, you need to step into this identity. And that's the way that, and it's the thing that I think connects it to the other ideas being said here is that's particular to you and your child. It's not that every child you see on the street, it's like, well, I guess I'm their parent too. If you're a boss at work, it's like, you're the boss at work, but if you walk out of work, you're just a guy on the street, And so you have, like, a specific relationship in every situation. And if you're, like, a comedian, when you get up on stage, you can't just say, like, I'm not funnier than anyone here, like, I'm just a guy. It's like, no, they want you to step into that identity of, like, you're here to entertain them. And, like, if that means they're giving you broad sway to say anything you want to say, as long as it makes them laugh. Like, once you have it's funny, like, as someone, like, who does comedy, once people know you as the funny person, it's so much easier to get people to laugh, because they're just interpreting through that framework.
They're ready
But
for
at
it,
first,
yeah.
when you first meet people, it's just like, why is he saying weird stuff? Like, that was a weird thing to say. But they don't even have the bridge to connect. And now suddenly it's like, oh, but that's I can't believe that's so good. That's so funny. But, like, there's not even the framework to even, when you first get to church, people are like, it's so funny, like, the first, like, 5 times you, like, look like a doofus, because I wish I could bottle those moments where I'm saying something where I'm like, this is so funny, it's gonna kill, and you say it, and everyone looks around like, what the heck is wrong with this person? I can't believe they said that. But of course, if you say, hey, I'm about to make a joke, please everybody get ready to receive the joke, you killed the joke. You've killed the relationship.
Okay,
So,
two quick questions, and then I'm going to go and let Lance take over in as much as he's willing to, or else other people can just leave when they want.
Yeah.
So first off, C-Money is also very smart, and he's technical. By the way, C-Money, I love people like you, because, like, the way that you talk, I can't do that. Like, my friend Yosef is that way. I see it, and I can understand it. Like, when you say it, I'm like, yes, that's what I'm talking about, but I can't talk about it in the way that you talk about it. I don't have that kind of, like, left-brained technical ability. I do see it. It's kind of like it's like Will Hunting, and when he's talking about the piano in Good Will Hunting, and he's like, I look at a piano, I see chopsticks, but Mozart, Beethoven, they saw and they could just play. Like, I can play, but I can't explain it. Alan, when I'm doing this, am I like talking about philosophy and theology in, like, a joke form, but I'm explaining the joke as I go? Is that what I'm doing?
No, I think you're a good example of someone who doesn't do that, and that's why everybody says, like, what the hell is Luke talking about? I mean, Michael even said, hey, Michael, I'm going to tattle on you. Michael was even like, oh, when I first came to the TLC, I didn't even like Luke. And so,
it's
like,
a common thing in my life.
But you're on mute, Michael. We can't hear you. But yeah, so, like, in the same way that, like, if you want to do comedy, you have to, like, struggle through being dumb and everyone not getting it. Like, don't water it, just do it, and you don't have to say, this is what I'm doing. Hey, everybody, look, I'm being funny. I'm doing a comedy.
Yeah, listen, everyone, I'm being smart. I'm doing
Alert.
things.
I am very smart. Alert. Interesting point incoming.
All right. Thank you, guys. I'm going to go. Appreciate everyone coming. I'll be listening.
Yeah, and I think, C-Money, one of the things you were talking about, which is, I think a lot of times when we're talking about these things, we struggle with imperfect words or descriptors or whatever, but we're trying to point at a thing, right? Like you're just trying
We're
to
aiming
point at it just trying to show something. And one of the things I totally agree with is that, and McMo talks about, he had a live stream called Epistemic Humility. And so when it comes to, so for like, there's something about apokatastasis, universalism, that really triggers people. It's pretty amazing. Like you can talk about certain doctrinal things and it doesn't get that kind of reaction. But there absolutely has to be an epistemic humility around it. I would venture to say I think we should have that same epistemic humility about infernalism or other things too, right? Like I think it's probably warranted all the way around. And I have this thing with Dr. Stephen Freeman, or Father Stephen Freeman, who's certainly open to the ideas. He engages in apokatastasis or universalism sort of topics. But, in kind of one of his responses to a guy who was asking some questions, one of his blog posts, who was trying to get some clarity around some things, he said, for one, in the good news department, what I have described is more just. In point of fact, no one is all sheep or all goat. He's talking about the sheeps and the goats and the separations, right? We're a mixed bag. Our anxieties wonder just how much goat we're allowed to have, or if that last confession killed the goat, or if my faith in Christ eliminates the goat threat, etc. And then we worry about those who have no outward relationship with Christ. Are they all goat? Or do the many good things they do, or even the very few good things they do, constitute a sheep? And how much sheep is necessary? So when we press these sorts of questions, a crayon-drawn version of these teachings simply come up short and feel unjust or too clumsy. For me, treating these teachings as regarding the inner person takes that clumsiness away and helps us to see that God is on our side. I don't really want the goat any more than he does. I don't want the hay, wood, and stubble any more than he does. If the scriptures say that he is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to salvation, then it makes sense to understand these things in a manner that makes it clear that God is for us. St. Paul exactly says that. God is for us. Who can be against us? I leave the theoretical question, will all be saved, unanswered and file it under things I don't know. But I believe that God is for us. This I know. In his blog post, he talked about it's just that God is good, that he's a good God. And that's what his whole blog post was about. But so I think when we have those conversations, when you're dealing with some of those things, that's why I think it's okay to point towards, like, put this option on the table for people. Because I don't think it, like, this option really wasn't on the table for me for most, and, really probably the first time I even kind of got a little glimmer of it might have been when Rob Bell was bringing it up in this coexist stuff or whatever. And I didn't pay much attention to it, but I think it's just getting people to wrestle with, and some of those things I shared about, like with George MacDonald, to maybe even start wrestling with the option that it might be on the table. And what does that mean?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, my thought on the whole thing was, regardless of if it's a sola scriptura or you have some other methodology for interpreting, we do believe that scripture is revelation from God. And as it is, there are things that are more clear and less clear, so say in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. That kind of, if I believe scripture is true authority, that kind of eliminates worldviews where you just think that everything came into be through random chance or something like that, so when it comes to these things that are derived downstream, in a sense, we could say that God did think it was dangerous to say some things that are true in the form of, like, scripture, In other words, there's no verse in the Bible that spells out like explicitly, this is exactly what happens when a person dies. Instead, he gave us this rather loose matrix of a whole lot of points coming from different things, and we have to rely on our trust in him and all the other things that we have, whether it is a church and authority that's going to help us interpret it, or just some systematic theology or whatever it is. Those, you can't say those differing opinions, like God didn't try to protect us from ever developing those things or whatever. So in a sense, you have to at least like affirm that God thought it was okay. God thought it was okay to let these ideas be out there. So when Luke, had his non-safetyist thing, like, I think that's true. So I mean, but there is some things that God has not spoken to us in a direct way, and so we can say those things are maybe not safe for us to know, but he did give us these other things to work through. And even when like a church makes a decision about something, like you take something like the Vatican II, you have a lot of Catholics that disagree with it. So they're saying like the church made a mistake when they did Vatican II. Well, then either they did or they didn't, but both of those, opinions are out there. So either one of them could be true in a sense. And so then all those things are downstream of how we live our lives and things like that. And so clearly the idea of universal salvation, I don't really have a problem with that. I think I can definitely see how for those whom have a strong conviction of it, it's a very meaningful part of how they're able to connect to God. I certainly think that at least the possibility of it is an important part of understanding God's nature. Like if that's not the case about God, and and for some reason I can't fathom, that's okay because he's God and I'm not. But I can't sit here and say God's not, a God that sends people to hell or whatever is not a good God and I won't worship him. Well, that's not something that we have the definitive level of proof about, I guess you could say. So, so that fuzziness, there is danger in it, but God's not afraid of the danger. And, we can use our wisdom about how we live in those things. But I think that our trust should be in God and in seeing what he's doing through those things, even if we don't understand it.
Well, and I think go ahead. I think one of the things about the corner, just really, I would say, sorry, Sumani, is that like we have the ability to say what we want to say and talk about what we want to talk about. And you're not going to like everything or whatever, and that's okay. But we give people the freedom, you know what I mean? And I know that like Nate says, I know, but he's coming from the heart. Like you can tell when he tells the story about like when he would say that I wouldn't believe in a God to do that, he links it very deeply into the love for his grandfather, right? And so there's a passion that comes with him around that. And so like I understand, like now that I know that a lot of that is where Nate's coming from, where he gets to say that thing, we all get to say the things that we want to say,
Yeah, I thought I came onto the live stream because I was really intrigued by this concept of the doctrinal intersectionality in hell. So then I came and did my little deconstructive thing where I tried to basically say that doctrine is some sort of abstracted out separation from a pure embodied connection. And then like intersectionality kind of is a result of the multiculturalism of a technologically connected society that crosses the globe. And so in this modern technical multiculturalism society, we have to pretend to all share the same language. But actually language is context dependent and is value dependent and embodied. And because we come from different cultures in different areas of the planet, we actually have a different embodiment, but then we're kind of presuming that we have to use the same common language. And so then we have to take our various embodied cultural identities and pretend that they all conform to a certain linguistic substrate. And there's something in that massive intersectionality that is basically like a Tower of Babel, because everybody has their own embodiment, everybody has their own language, but then we're trying to speak the same language, and then we're saying the same words, but it has a different meaning, and then the tongues are confused, and we crumble, right? And so part of that is just being born 2,000 years after Christ, 10,000 years after civilization, at the peak of civilization, whatever you want to call this modern dynamic that we live in. I think there's something about that is Babelous and is hell-like. And so there's something about doctrines are like Mammon, intersectionality is like the Tower of Babel. And when we are being possessed by the spirit of both of those, it is something indistinguishable from hell because we feel disconnected and disempowered, which is why we come to places like the TLC to try to reconnect and be re-empowered and to try to process these ideas. So I think that was the impetus for the live stream, or at least that's why I jumped on and maybe corrupted it with my own ideas. But I wanted to open that up for people. What do you guys got?
I mean, that's what PVK, a lot of what he's doing, that's a lot of what he does, like in his videos and his monologues, right? See, Money, probably what you...
I'm trying to embody that spirit. Like, how do we play with this spirit? How do we send this spirit out and engage it and create an environment to practice playing in the pondering of propositions for the progress of our personal, whatever, fuck you, sorry. But yeah, no, this is fun. This is interesting to me. So
yeah, and one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking, and then is Luke had talked about there, which is I think a lot of people, like, the joke around here is, what do you mean by that, right? So trying to get to the heart of, like, because people do define things potentially maybe in different ways, so what are we really talking about? So then we can kind of have some sort of understanding and conversation. And I think one of the interesting things that we've been all experiencing, at least I can say in the United States, is people want to define words, and like literally they'll update the dictionary when someone's giving a testimony in Congress, and then they literally within an hour had updated a dictionary definition to try and match what someone was saying in a congressional hearing. And I'm like, so this fight over language, and then telling you, like, even I found it really fascinating when I don't want to say it. Well, I would just say that. So I didn't realize
desires that objective relationship is somewhat of a Cain-like spirit. I think that's somewhat of a satanic impulse. I think that's somewhat using a substitution of the tool in lieu of the original participation, in lieu of divine inspiration. I think that's almost like a facade or a fake way of doing it. It's a deception. It's a ruse. So part of me wants to not even then justify that with an explicit response, because then that would be casting pearls before swine and then allowing somebody to say, oh, this was his explicit response. This is what he said is true. Let me deconstruct that and prove that wrong. Therefore, he's wrong. And I just fucking see that everywhere. And I'm, doing it to myself in public. So here we are.
And so what do you, so what do you see as the way to combat that in terms of how we relate with one another?
I don't know. The meekly here I am to be processed by the community. I don't know. I don't know. I can't do it in my own silo of thought. I think it requires some sort of communal feedback. I think it requires some sort of communal orientation towards the good that we can then change our own selves and get out of our self-deceptive reaffirmative tendencies. And so I actually don't know. Because of who I am, I'm oriented this way. And it's oriented the wrong way. And then you're like, well, how do you do it the right way? And I'm like, well, all I know is this direction. And so I think it's something about reorienting yourself properly.
Well,
Luke, glad to see you, buddy.
If I could jump in just for a moment. when I worked at a summer camp, it was like a 8-week, summer camp, sleep away. You're sort of in rural Maine, so all it is 150 people, let's say. And one thing that as a young, when I was in my 20s, early 20s, that surprised me is every year we'd get there and you'd be like, well, last summer was magical and we had all these inside jokes and all these things developed. Like, how could that happen again? Like, how could you have your own, like when you're riding on the bus to get there, like everyone's in their own clothing. You have guys who are very preppily dressed, kids who are, more grunge. And then when you get to the camp, it's all in uniforms. But the point being of like, the spirit of that summer, the spirit of that time developed through the relationships, through just living together in community, and you have your own language. And then you try and explain any of these things to someone who didn't go to a summer camp and they have no idea what you're talking about. That's not to say
Because
that
there's
summer
no
camp's
embodied
perfect or
reference.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So many of the words, even words that we'd use, just they have no corollary. And if you look at like things like words like cool or lit in the more modern parlance, they just come to mean good. Oh, that's lit, which is just like, whereas like if you look at the original context, they have much more specific meanings, but as you generalize them and everyone in culture starts using the word cool, that was probably like more of like a 1920s, I mean, cool is a very old word at this point, but it just means good. Even your grandpa will say, oh, that sounds cool or whatever, but that came from somewhere. It had a specific meaning and then it had to be flattened just to mean like anything's just kind of good relative to the culture that you're in currently, um, and even words like have like specific meanings, like very specific meanings, like countercultural can just mean like, they get flattened and they just mean like, oh, okay, if you're a hipster in Brooklyn, you want to be countercultural. That just means good as well. Very subversive, that doesn't actually mean what it intended. So yeah, there's a context. Sorry, to summarize, there's a context that we just try and flatten and just say like, well, I want my truths to be true for all time. So I'm just going to flatten it and it's going to have no relationship to the people around me. And it's just going to be, everything's just a derivative of 1 + 1 = 2. Everything is just the same level of truth as 1 + 1 = 2.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the same kind of spirit of Cain that wants to flatten everything and make everything meaningless. Like meaning comes from contrast. And so when you stop all contrast, then you kind of also stop all meaning or all potential for meaning as well. And then something you're saying, you're talking about using concepts with no correlate. And there's something about having embodied experience that when you say something, it correlates to something embodied and real. And there's something about the modern condition where we talk back and forth to each other, and that kind of results in like a beta thinking or a lack of participation or a lack of alpha thinking because you can't use the concept to then connect to the embodiment. And so there's some sort of disembodied use of language. And then there seems to be a cultural drive to disembody themselves and use language instead of whatever else. And so there's a weird idol worshiping, beta thinking, something like that triggered me when you were talking, Alan. I don't know if that helps clarify or if that's a contradiction, but that's just what occurred to me.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, no, I agree. I think that people often be like in lieu of you can say like, oh, I had this, I climbed Mount Everest. I had this experience and then I thought about my mom and I, healed my relationship with her. And like, but someone will just say like, I don't want to climb Mount Everest because that sounds painful and bad. Like, there's just no way of crossing that bridge of like the deepest experiences you have. Anytime someone tries to explain like their come to God moment, it almost sounds trite because they're the only ones that could have had that moment. You could say like I was riding on the bus and I was thinking about how hard my life is, and then like I realized something about my relationship with my parents. I realized something about Jesus, but the other person's just going to hear I was sitting on the bus, and they're like, well, I've sat on the bus and it has nothing to do with Jesus, or nothing to do with my parents. They have no corollary, which is why it's so hard to unless you really live in relationship with these people and see what they mean by how they act and like how you live in relationship with them, you have no idea what they're talking about.
Yeah, so there's something about the meaning that signifies something embodied and relevant to an individual. It seems like as if a lot of modern conversation is just chatting about abstract facts. And most of those abstract facts are kind of irrelevant. And they're not embodied meaning. They don't signify that I need to change in response to this new information. And therefore, they're not really new information because they're not changing the way you're informed. And so a lot of people talk and talk and talk, and it's just useless, not connecting stuff. The point of speech is to re-inform or to change the way somebody's thinking, or to bring new shit to light, or to bring a new perspective, or to bring more information. And then that transforms and that updates. And there's a sort of playing back and forth in that transformational update that allows transcendence. And then there's a sort of, well, I'm going to separate something and speak objectively, and then this is something separate, and then that's meaningful. That's actually just kind of bullshit. To use the Frankfurtian, proper sense. Sorry, not to swear, but it's something like that seems like a bad faith engagement. It seems like a deception. It seems like a Luciferian intellectual tactic of sophistry to convince somebody to do something. But it's actually just kind of meaningless and irrelevant, and nobody's going to act differently tomorrow. Like, it's not a transformative experience where somebody goes through this journey, goes on this quest, and then changes their personality in response to it. It's like, oh yeah, that guy weighs 37 pounds. And it's like, there's just irrelevant facts everywhere. Sorry, I got lost there, but.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's funny, like, talking to someone who's really into music or really into sports. Like, if you're not that way, and I'm sort of often in conversations where I'm not on the same wavelength as people who are really into music or in sports, any attempts for me to like, oh, well, why do you like the Giants, or why do you like this baseball team? Like, that's what they're doing, is they're experiencing support for a team. They're identifying with a team. They're having this experience. And me asking, like, well, why do you support them, is not part of that dynamic. Or like asking them, like, oh, do you think that Alex Rodriguez will have a good season this year? It's like, that has nothing to do with, I love this team, they're going to win the championship. They could say they're going to win the championship, but that has nothing to do with the facts, or like, they're not going to go to like some like betting website and see what the odds are of their team winning the championship. That's not what they mean when they say that. They're having an experience of relating to the players, relating to that moment where you see your favorite player hit a home run, and that ecstatic celebrating. But it doesn't have anything, their statement, they're going to win the championship, is not related to dead facts of what do the betting markets say the odds are of them winning the championship. They're saying, no, they're going to win because I'm participating in rooting for them, and participating for rooting with them gives me a sense of meaning and purpose, because I like the feeling of them winning over losing, and that's the experience I want to have. So I want to see them win all the games, and the thing that represents winning all the games is winning the championship, which proves that, so yeah, that like, you're just locked out of that experience if you're not on that same wavelength. And, people like to make fun of people who are into sports, but like, it's the same thing with music. It's like, when someone has a favorite artist, it's about having that experience of being in the crowd, feeling like they even made eye contact with you. Me and, my favorite jazz musician, we're locked together in this moment. But you can't just say like, oh, well, do you like piano dominant jazz, or do you like, other instrument dominant jazz? They'll be like, this has nothing to do with what I want to talk about when I talk about jazz.
Yeah, sorry, I got a little distracted. I was looking at the pop-up, and Luke said non-talking, talking. And I wanted to see if I could riff off of that a little bit. It seems like a lot of times when people are talking, they're kind of over-identified with their egoic self, or apparent self, their ego. And so when their ego is thinking socially, then all the implications of the social connections of the ego become relevant. And then what is talking is the complex that is attached to the society that's communicating the relevance based on the fluent frameworks of the headspace. That's one sense of self, and that's your ego sense of self. Then you have like a Jungian self that's like a greater self, of which the ego is just a tiny fraction. And so then if you are identified with your greater self, then your ego is not being attended to, and it is not, your attention is not in it. And so your ego then becomes a vessel for the expression of the greater self. And then if the greater self is trying to communicate something, then the smaller, lesser egoic self is not talking, because it isn't in control of the attention. The attention is being received from the divine self, from the greater self. And so you're not talking as an individual self, you are just expressing via something else. I kind of wish Luke was in person, and so I could riff back and forth with him instead of trying to look into the comments. But I thought that there's a sort of profane expression where it's your ego connecting all the things your ego thinks it knows. And then there's some sort of divine expression or a prophetic transmutation where you're like almost sitting back and being a vessel and letting the divine muse possess you and express through you. And in that sense, it isn't your ego self talking, but your ego self is talking or is acting out the message of a greater egregore or hyper object, or there's a greater spirit that is then using you as matter to express it. And so it's not myself talking, it's somebody else talking through me. And so that's what I thought he meant by non-talking talking. But again, I wish he was here to play with that. An angel sent from God to explain all my Lukeisms. Praise be to God. Something like that. Yeah. I'm trying to speak for you, Luke, even though you're not here. I don't know how to do this without you, but hey,
all right.
There it is.
Can you? This is fun for me because, like, when you're talking, I'm just like, yes, thank God, this is unbelievable.
I'm trying to say it for you, even though you're not here. It's hard to read your mind from so far away. Come closer, dude.
No, it's so good. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
So I have a term. I don't even know if you're familiar with it, but I call it the egoic intellect, and it's essentially what you were just talking about.
I call it the Luciferian intellect, probably.
Yeah, it's the same thing. And it's not even like I have a problem with the ego. The ego serves a purpose, but you have to know that the ego is in subject to something that transcends it, which is essentially the Whitestone name, which is like the quantum you.
It's a humble, submissive relation to be subject to something greater than you. Yeah.
Yes, which is like the idea of you could call it the implanted word, you could call it the imago Dei, you could call it the divine spark, you can call it whatever you want, but it's the particular iteration, which is the fullness of you. And different people have spoken about this in many different ways. Like Aquinas, I think, spoke about it, but it's almost like the telotic. It's not even future. It's like it's the perfected you, which is calling to you, which is the thing that enables you to transform toward its image, which is Christ in me.
May I?
Yeah.
So it's not the perfect whatever in you, but it is a less sinful ability for you to reflect that pure spirit, something like that. It reduces your corruption because everybody is corrupt in the way that they express things. And so by doing good works, you reduce your corruption. And by reducing your corruption, you allow yourself to be a pure vessel. And then a pure vessel for the expression of God makes you more or makes you better, powerful, or whatever.
Yes. And this,
like
yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. But this is related to a topic that I think it came up in the Jordan Daniel Wood conversation, but it's almost like true people say true things.
Right.
The trueness of the person is because the intellect, like, and this is why I say things like the intellect is, or even intelligence. Intelligence is not, we have an idol of it for sure in this country and in this culture, in this world,
Absolutely.
But it's not a good. The intellect can be used for anything. It's terrible. It's horrifying.
It's an emissary.
Yes.
It's a useful emissary, but a horrible master.
But exactly,
we're in the hell. We're in the doctrinal intersectional hell of the Luciferian intellect, of the pretense that meaning can be transmitted via words, and that we can substitute our own personal development for just regurgitating something we read in a book. No,
yeah, the meaning crisis, what you just said.
That's Cain-like sacrifice, and that's just going to lead you to hell.
Yes. If you think meaning can be transferred by words, you don't understand meaning and you don't understand people.
Correct.
You're fundamentally in you don't understand relational ontology. You're still in a mode of
worshiping, beta thinking fool, something like that, right?
Yes. Yeah. But the problem is
to people who fall victim to this stuff because that's how society structures you to think. I'm not trying to say I'm on my high horse and I'm being critical of everybody. The reason I'm saying these things is because I've found myself victim to this shit over and over and over and over and over. I'm speaking out of being on the other side of that, not from. Sorry, just to.
And ultimately, I
think feel the comments like whatever. I can feel the public.
No, I'm the same. I like as I'm speaking.
Suffering under Sart's look is so hard in a live stream. But sorry.
When I talk, I was just doing this with my wife this morning because I'll relate this to some like codependent problem that I have because I'm like essentially there are aspects of my parenting where I'm being the you know, the enabling mother, where I'm I don't want to deal with confrontation with some of my children in certain ways because I know the emotional stress that will take. And so I just do things for them because I don't want to hold their feet to the fire. And I even, and my wife like says, well, we need to do this. And like, we can't keep doing this. And I think that's true. And I almost feel like this, I'm relating to you is because like I'm always I'm anticipating. I live in such anxiety of the future relationally because I anticipate responses. Like I do this actively as I'm saying the things that we're saying. Like the thing that you just did, I do all the time. I'm just like, I'll say this thing, and in the middle of me saying it, I anticipate the rebuttals and what people are going to hear, and then I go and address it.
And then that which is most adaptive is also that which is most potentially self-deceptive and self-destructive, and then you cut yourself off, and then. It's adaptive to project the response and then to respond meaningfully to the response, but it's self-deceptive when you get in that feedback loop and you can't finish what you're saying.
Yeah,
and so that's the fine line, and I think that's the line of the yin yang, of the serpent, of the moving back and forth, the either or and both and, the cross, the crucial intersection of reality, of which original participation in character is developed, or something like that.
Right, and it's a
I don't even know what an Anglican is.
Perfect. I actually want, you got to do, so I'm going to go again because I got to be doing other stuff, but I love riffing with you. We should just set up a talk sometime in general. Oh, Alan left. But I also, someone needs to do a randos with you. Do you know what a randos is?
I've heard it mentioned 15 different times, but I'm still not entirely sure what it is.
Okay, so I would argue, very in line with McLuhan and the medium is the message. I think part of why Paul Vanderklay has been so good at fostering and creating the hospitality for what I believe is a real emergent community. It's not just like ideology groups. I think it truly is an emergent community that enables us to have these conversations is because of the randos. So what Paul did, the short version is he put out a video about Jordan Peterson and a pastor's response to it. All these people reached out to him wanting to talk to him, and he started talking to them. And then he decided, well, you know, these things are so good and interesting that I should just make them public. And so then he started asking people to make them public. And so Paul has always had two parallel things on his channel. He does his monologues and his commentary videos where he's talking about ideas, but then side by side with that, and actually the heart of his channel has been the randos conversations, where these people who reached out to him because something was resonant, and he and Paul largely in those, they're about ideas, but they're primarily about the people, because the people just come on and tell them about their lives, tell them their stories. Why are you here? Why is this interesting? And the sacred kind of liturgical question that's come up is like, tell me about the house you grew up in. Tell me about your religious background. And then people just talk about their lives. And like that has always been, relation precedes relata, right? It's not about the ideas. Yeah. The randos conversations
are the self-expression and learning to relate without self-expression. And that's how you build community. And
the medium, yes, the medium of Paul's channel has always been the randos, which is the relation. The relation is always primary. That's why I say to people like Nathan Ormond, who was this, he's an interesting figure in the corner and in corner lore, but I had a conversation with him once, or I said in some comment, like, it's deeper than ideas, man. And he like mocked me and made fun of me for it because he's very into ideas. But like I meant something very serious about that.
Yeah.
Like I was conveying a very profound idea in that, but he just took it as like woo woo kumbaya bro talk.
Yeah.
Huh?
Casting pearls before swine, and they misinterpret. You hate to see it.
But even that for me is like, I repeatedly, all the people, I value all the people that push back. I value the zero sum, philo,
I struggle with that.
Nicaea conversationalists. I want them around because they point out my own idolatry in the fact that I don't even believe a lot of the shit that I'm saying.
As long as they're a worthy adversary, that's good. If they're critiquing for the sake of critiquing, then that's not helpful. But if they're critiquing in the spirit of modification, then that's helpful.
It is if I receive it well.
But yeah, so how do you cultivate that receptivity, and then how do you foster proper critique? And then something like both of those, where we're more open to critique and they're more pure in their critique, something like that.
I think you do it this way.
A mutual encouragement. Sorry.
I think you're made perfect by what you suffer.
Right.
I think that's how you do it. And
so
you learn the humility through
the abuse of the critics. Where does that? How does that work?
However it manifests to you personally. A lot of times for me, it's my critics. I mean, I have all my own personal stuff in my family and ways that I'm learning to do that. Like my cliff notes, I have all these cliff notes that like say, like, I mean, I could write unendingly tomes on what this means, but like kenosis by kenosis, like that's my cliff notes of everything. Or receive with meekness the implanted word. It's all saying the same stuff, but like, and you could talk about it forever, but like that's as succinct as I can get it.
Meaningful. You talking about it forever does not necessarily make it inspirational to Joe listening to YouTube.
Absolutely, and that's the self-emptying part of my communication, because I could just sit here and demand and just be like, it's all there. Just think about it more.
But if your self-emptying, in my opinion, should be theoretically inspired to serve as a medium for other travelers to grab that tool and then use that for their own self-transcendence, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's the humility, I think, that comes in your own self-emptying of learning how to be transformed and say things differently in a way that people can hear. And you only have a potential, I mean, you only have degrees of capacity for that. Because like, again, that's back to what I was saying with like freedom and will, is like, I can't do that right now because I am who I am now. I can make minor changes and alterations for a future version of myself to be a better communicator for certain people. But I'm also limited by my finitude.
Can I interrupt you here?
Yeah.
So we're talking about responding to a critic, and in particular, a bad faith critic. So my question to you is, how do you good faithfully engage with a bad faith critic? Because obviously God is everywhere, and so there's still goodness within engaging in a bad faith critic.
Absolutely.
But if they are hell bent on decadence and destruction, how do you balance that? And like, I don't know.
As a martyr.
I want to throw that idea out there.
As a martyr.
And then through suffering the death, you grow, learning new and reform your personality in a different way.
Yeah, I think you either learn. I think you either learn to die to yourself, which may include your ideas, which may include your way of wanting to talk about the ideas. It may include all the different things, and ultimately, at the end of the day, like Saint Maximus, I often bring up Saint Maximus, who like he was sharing his ideas very much in line with my heart, and people didn't like what he was saying, so then they cut off his hand and cut out his mouth, and still he wouldn't be silent, and so they killed him. So that's how a Christian responds to critics, like in the most extreme form.
So if your personality is built on the memories and the associations you have and who you think you are and the beliefs you have about the world, and then you go interact with reality and reality punches you in the face, then the spirit of the person who can admit the way that their personality was insufficiently constructed, which got them slapped in the face by reality, it's that person who's willing to go through the ego death of the identification with the insufficient conceptual complex. It's something like practicing that metaphorical death over and over and over, that you then transcend your personality and become wiser and become a better person and become more pure and able to be a vessel for goodness, something like that.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a good way to say it. Metanoia. Metanoia is sacred, as our good friend Chad, who I'm sure is not participating here and angry right now. But that's a good one that Chad said in a conversation with Tayo, actually, and Elizabeth Oldfield. Okay, I'm going to go listen again since Mark and Tayo are here. Yeah. And if you call me out enough and tempt me too much, I'll come back.
No, I think I'm tapped out on my stimulation. Thank you for opening the space for me to engage.
Somebody needs to randos this guy, and I email me at the person podcast. I think that's it, at Gmail. And we need to figure something out, because you're different than me. You're like much more analytical, technical, but like, you know what I'm talking about. I know you know what I'm talking about, because everything you're saying is.
I'm trying to vibrate on that same frequency with you, right? I'm trying to partnership with you.
Well, that's good. The person podcast at Gmail. All right, see you guys. Mark, Tyle, love you guys.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Okay.
I came for this.
Hi, Kyle. Yeah, this is not going to be as good. You and I are not as symbiotic as C-Money and Luke was.
Right. Yeah. Can you hear me over the noise? I'm in an airport. Sorry.
You do have
Uh,
noise.
Did you
yeah.
want to bring out a critique, Tayo?
No, I wanted to stay on the last question that C-Money asked of how do you respond to, how do you remain in good faith dialogue with someone that's in bad faith dialogue with you?
That's why I jumped in too. Was on that point. So.
Well, bring it up, boys. Talk about it.
Well, we don't have nothing to push against. What do you think, Tayo?
No. I am the youngest there. You older gentlemen. Give me something to push against.
I think okay. Well, part of that statement assumes that uh, the without okay, I'm going to be unfair to C Money for a second. Just it assumes that C Money is in good is a good faith is in good faith 100% of the time, and it assumes that the bad faith actor is in bad faith 100% of the time. That's I wish he was here so he could like. I don't think any of us are in good faith all the time. I don't think all of us are in bad faith all the time. Now there are some fairly, I'd say even the most bad faith, the, 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 the most insincere people here in the corner are generally have some good moments. Um, and does any of that make sense? Is that resonating at all?
Yeah.
It's a purity. It's like a purity stand, and I'm not sure we know how to. We know ourselves that well. Go ahead, Tile. Sorry to interrupt.
You've been in enough conversations. You've been doing the on-ramp radio for a while now. You know when there's a quality nature to conversations, and sometimes it may be good, sometimes maybe not so good. And I think it's the not so good times that the question of good faith / bad faith comes into it. Does that track with you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but also I think there's kind of an assumption that conflict in what C Money and Luke were having a wonderful time of fellowship together, and they were like having a kind of what are those kind of poetry slams or something back and forth. They were making a ton of sense to each other and probably less sense to the peanut gallery or the chat or the audience. To them, they were really resonating and they were having an awesome moment of fellowship, and it was beautiful. If I were to parse the words, I would mess that up.
Yeah.
And not being okay. And I don't want to do that. It's like quenching the spirit, right? I don't want to do that. Even though, oh, go ahead.
No, sorry. Nate's comment in the chat threw me off because I don't know why he's coming at you that way.
I didn't see the chat. What did he say?
It's fine.
I'm on my phone. Well, no, if there's something they'd like me to respond to, that's fine. I think you can have, I think there's a benefit to conflict at times. It can be extremely productive, even though it's miserable in the moment. It can also be destructive and permanently so, or nothing's permanent, but it can be traumatic, but it isn't necessarily a bad in and of itself, or in
what
totality.
sorry Mark, sorry Nate, what are you on about, mate? And I love you and I thank you for allowing me to be on your channel, but Mark says that what they were saying were incomprehensible. How can you tell him what's comprehensible to him or not? That's what personalism was all about. Each person
I see.
See what they're saying.
No, I think very little is comprehensible when you really say put the victim side lens on anything. I think most of what we do it falls into the category of language games, and so you can really, if you really want to squeeze concrete meaning out of any statement in any language, we find that very little is perfectly comprehensible in a universal sense. But that doesn't mean that there isn't a beauty in what people do when they have a moment of profound fellowship together, and that's what I would say they were experiencing. I don't think they weren't performing philosophy. They were, as I said, seemed more like poetry than prose.
Yeah, and
which is good.
I thought it was adorable to watch. It was like a first date where they both clearly like each other, sort of,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
lost in, I think, is that not what dialogos is, which is a way in which they were both seeing and amplifying what others were seeing. It's like, oh, you see it too, and that excitement of being seen. We've all experienced it to one ever or another. Now, that's why I came in when Simone asked the question about pushback, because I don't know if a dialogos is, if what you're always aiming for is dialogos, I don't know if you can welcome pushbacks or critics or criticisms in the conversation.
Yeah. I were they saying, was C Money, where was the line for C Money in when you were listening to him, guys, on what is constructive versus destructive criticism, or not constructive criticism? Not was that a clear line for you, or was he just? I wish he was here.
Yeah, I think like one of the things that just was coming to me, like you had talked about good faith or bad faith, and I think you're right. Like I shared, we're not all sheep and we're not all goat. Like I've got wheat and tares in me, Mark, as much as you know what I mean. Like the cuts right to the heart of me, the heart of man, right? So I'm in this constant struggle to do those sorts of things. I think part of the thing about good faith, bad faith is like it's kind of like there was a Supreme Court case in the 70s. It's like definition of pornography, you know it when you see it, sort of thing, or whatever. It's like we all have people who, I mean, at some point, particularly if you're just getting to know someone or have some sort of conversations, I can be perceived as difficult, and we all can at some point. We all know that point in time where you've dealt with someone and you've had conversations and they don't listen to anything you're talking about, and they just have some burr under their saddle or something, and it's just, you know what I mean? Yeah. They're just constantly out for whatever their thing is, and you realize there's nothing going on. I have plenty of people that I firmly disagree with on things, but we talk in good faith. It's almost like they're for us. You know what I mean? It's that definition of leadership, like when you know they're for you, then you'll follow them, sort of thing. And I think we have a lot of people in the corner that disagree really distinctly about things. Like, so for example, I love that Tayo is so honest about how Luke can annoy him with certain things, right? But I know this, but also Tayo has said this and he means this. He loves Luke. Like there's a thing in him so Tayo is a point of processing, but he's not against Luke, if that makes sense. Like he's for Luke, who he is. And so I think that's probably when things go really well here. And so I enjoy, and I found this a lot in the corner. I'm not as well read in the philosophical kind of things that some people like they've engaged in for years. They've thought about them and they want to start talking like up at this level. So I don't understand a lot of that sometimes, but I can pull certain things down and I'm like, oh, okay, wait a minute. But what I do enjoy is, because I think we've all experienced this in our own life, I think opponent processing is good, but sometimes it's really nice to be with someone that you're on the same frequency with, and you can just be you and talk the way you talk. And like Luke's a high intuitor, and obviously I bet C Money is too. And so I do this thing where I don't finish my sentences, like, because I'm already moved on to the next thing, and I have like a lot of what's that meme from Always Sunny in Philadelphia where he has all the strands everywhere? Like I'm thinking about a million things while I'm talking about this. And so some of my best friends, I don't have to finish the sentences, but they intuited, they kind of knew where my sentence was going to end, and they can just come with me. And so I can just free flow and just creatively talk and just be there. And I like to be in those situations, but I can't be there all the time because then no one understands what the hell I'm talking about. Right. So it's this yin and yang. And sometimes it's really nice just to, oh man, somebody was resonating with and they were mapping onto things in their own world. And wow, we're resonating together. And I think you used a really good word, fellowship. Like, I think what you realize is, wow, these guys are really, getting into it. And I think it's fair that I because I wasn't brought up in a philosophical, that just wasn't something that I really got into. And so when people really start talking about certain philosophers or things like that, like sometimes when they get up there, I'm not following along. But what the corner has allowed me to do is when I listen into these conversations, and if I listen to them long enough, I start to grab some of right. I can map onto this in a more simple man's way. And I'm like, oh, I get what they're talking about. And that matches this wisdom that maybe I see in a 12-step group or something I've just seen in my life or whatever. I'm like, oh, okay, they're talking about this sort of thing.
That sounds all good and right, but in actuality, what really happens is what just happened with Mark and Nate, where just the slightest hint of a pushback from Mark had Nate spiraling in the comments about you just don't understand. Every conversation is not for everyone else. There isn't you don't. It's not comprehensible to you, but it made sense to me. So there is a push against. I mean, I do it anyway because I'm sort of a stubborn little bastard of giving this pushback in this space particularly. But it's not welcome. It's not encouraged. It's what's encouraged is the beautiful moments we just witnessed between C Money and Luke, where I speak, you understand, and speak back to me the things that I said, and I say back to you the things that I just said. There's a place for that, but that seems to be what's defined as good faith conversation, not opponent processing. That's at best tolerated.
Maybe it's a kind of tolerance issue. We talk about any structures have tolerances, how much weight they can bear, how much centrifugal force or this or that. Engineers think in these terms. I'm not an engineer, but I mean, I get the idea. And it may be people and relationships have metaphorically a similar tolerance kind of issue. Relationships have tolerances. New relationships probably are more fragile than older, well-established relationships. Relationships between people with common fundamental axioms or values probably can withstand more pushback and more challenges than relationships that are already in tension. Nate and I seem to be going through a moment going back to the Jordan Daniel Wood discussion. And so right now, tolerances are being strained. My guess is we'll get through it. But does that make any sense?
I think it does, and I think you're right. There's a if the foundation isn't quite set, it's difficult to build upon, and put too much stress on the relationship. And opponent processing is stress inducing, and I'll tolerate the stress because if I believe that we're in dialogue, and like Simone was saying, you're trying to constructively help me, not drag me down. if there's a little strain on the relationship, then I push back and be seen as you are trying to tear me down.
Right. Yeah, I would never try to tear down Luke or Nate or anybody in the corner. Even though there have been times when I've been accused of trying to do that. And so, there are just some relationships can be pursued and some relationships have to be set aside for the time being until circumstances change. Because we don't want to break the larger community over personal difficulties. So yeah, but like I did I started out you can look it up on my live streams, salsa, metagetical salsa. And I just started out with an apology to Luke. And I think I used the phrase pearls before swine, that he was casting his pearls before swine and I was the chief porker. I didn't get everything, and it's because I didn't completely understand. I communicated poorly. I'm going to mute for a second.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I just didn't want the loudspeaker to mess up your stream. Sorry.
I think one of the things I like, for me, one of the things I do appreciate about both Luke and Nate, and I would extend this over to you, Mark, too, or whatever, is like, for example, this is being broadcast on Grill Country, right? And Nate's in the comments, and Tayo, I believe you're an admin at Grill Country, right? And so Nate is fine with having people on a channel that he cares a lot about, right? And then this is going to Luke's channel too, and they're more like Luke's in the comments here. I see that, like, they're more than like happy to let other voices come in, and even voices that disagree with them. That's one of the things I do appreciate about them. And like listen, this is we're in community. We're in conversational community in this little corner, right? And people have been here for years. People are meeting each other in real life. They connect, everything else. And so, every now and again, as in our own families, there are dust-ups and periods of time where, don't see eye to eye, or feelings get hurt, or whatever those sorts of things are. But we push on through, right? And hopefully over a period of time, I think in the best sense, I've seen people who've been around here a long time. A lot of people try and find some middle ground, or a way to exist, if that makes sense, and let bygones be bygones on certain things.
Great. Thoughts, Tayo, before I sign off? Oh, there he is.
I don't have much to say.
Okay.
Well, pray for me, guys. I'm going to be driving from Chicago back to California along the I-80. So it'll be an interesting adventure in sub-zero temperatures, probably at times. I don't know.
Yeah. You'll be crossing my wonderful home state of Nebraska. So enjoy yourself.
Oh, you're in Nebraska?
That's where I was born and where I grew up. I'm living in Texas now, but I'm a Nebraskan through and through.
Okay. What should I expect on the I-80 in Nebraska? Just lots of flat, cold, windy.
Yeah, easy drive.
Okay, cool.
Yep. Good. Once you get through Omaha, and you get to Lincoln, you're not going to worry about running into any massive traffic jams or anything like that, as long as it's not snowy or icy. It's smooth sailing all the way to Colorado.
Cool. All right.
All right.
I'll keep you all posted. All right. Have a good day, guys.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.